Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to draw the President-elect of the United States, Donald Trump, in a profile view. We're going to begin the way we begin all our drawings with a generic cranium form. Remember, this should be a little bit wider than it is tall. Focus. And we're going to draw the line of the face straight down from the front of the cranium. Okay, while you guys are catching up, I'm just going to sketch on here how I'm thinking about this. There's the back of the cranium. There's the front of the cranium. And there's this space between the front and the back. There's the ear hole. Here's the line of the face coming straight down from the brow ridge. And here's the jawline. So these are the forms that we're trying to draw right now. Remember, what we've learned is that the brow ridge is just a little below the center of the cranium. So we're going to go to 3 o'clock on here, and then we're going to draw the brow ridge projecting out just below 3 o'clock. And eye level is going to be right under the brow ridge, about here. If we go from the eyebrow to the bottom of the cranium, which is the bottom of the nose, that's this distance here. That should be about the same as this distance from the bottom of the nose to the bottom of the chin. Everyone agree with me on that? Okay, so we're going to use that information to discover how long to make the face. And this is the thing that most of you still do wrong. Most of you make the face way too long. So make sure this distance and this distance are the same. And make sure your nose lands near the bottom of your cranium. His head is tipped back a little bit, and he's pretty old, so he has a large earlobe. That's why the ear is dropping down below the level of the nose in this photograph. So we're going to have to account for that somehow. But these are our main proportions. And if we take this unit and move it upwards to here, we should hit roughly where the hairline is, which is about here. His hair obviously projects out past his hairline, but we'll deal with that later. So notice the ear hole is towards the back of the bottom of this little box. The jawline is like this. And for the collar, we're going to block in the hair and the collar at this stage of the drawing before we do the features. So I'm going to look for where's the top of the collar land, and it lands even with the back of the cranium and a little bit below the bottom of the cranium. So we're going to go even with the back of the cranium and a little below the bottom to here, and the collar slopes down at about probably 35 degrees from horizontal. So an angle about like this. And when we get down below the angle of the jaw here, we're going to go up towards the chin like that. Now to block in the hair, we're going to simplify this into a straight line going up. We're going to hit the back of the cranium here with an angle. We're going to go pretty straight across the top, and then we're going to start angling down, and we're going to go out way past the brow ridge like this. And something like that. The collar itself is fairly consistent width, and it ends just below the neck. And there's sort of a steep angle here for the back of the shoulders. Notice you could almost recognize him already just from the neck and the hair. Have a few clues to his identity before we even settled on any of the features, which is kind of interesting. We're going to keep blocking things in. Let's block in the earlobe. We're going to hang the earlobe down past the bottom of the cranium. And we're going to angle the ear back towards the back of the head a little bit. Notice that the top of the ear is just a little below eye level, very close to eye level. So we marked eye level, so we're going to just mark the back of the ear about there. I hope I can encourage you to use this approach in your self-portraits. Most significantly, that we are, what a lot of you still do is you approach a portrait by like drawing an eye, then you draw the other eye, then you draw the nose, then you draw the mouth, and then you're done. Then you draw the outside of the head. We're starting with blocking in some big forms, and we're going to be placing the features within these structures. I'm just going to throw the tie in here, and then I'm going to take a quick break to look at your work. Okay, now we are going to get into the features. Attention, please. We're going to get into individual features now. So we're going to clean up these annotations and zoom in to the really interesting part right here. Okay, so we know where the brow ridge is. So we know where this indentation is. It's right under the brow ridge. And then we can see this angle. We're going to try to copy this angle precisely. And notice his nose is very straight until it gets to here, and then it bends down just a little. And then it's pretty round at the tip. Remember, what we like to do is picture the size circle we could fit into the radius of the tip of the nose. So that's too big. It's going to be something like that. So that's a good way to think about noses. Look for that radius. Okay. There's a technique that a lot of artists use called triangulation, where we can box this form into a triangle and see what kind of triangle it forms. And see what happens. This is, what is this, isosceles when it's the same on both sides? It's not equilateral, and its axis is not 100% vertical. So you see how I can use that triangle to help me see these angles. So I'm just going to copy that triangle in my drawing, and that's going to help me it helps me locate where the back of the olive falls. Back of the olive falls significantly behind this indentation, which is what we determined with this angle here. And I'm doing the back of the olive before I do the philtrum, because when I'm trying to draw the philtrum, I'm always trying to relate it to these two changes, the back of the olive and the tip of the nose. And normally the philtrum falls centered between these two forms. You'll notice here the philtrum is way to the left of center. So we're going to draw that now, way to the left of center. To check our work, we can pull a plumb line up from here, and we can see the philtrum also lands directly underneath that indentation. So I can use that to check my work, make sure my philtrum's in about the right place. While we're up here, we know where eye level is. And what I taught you is that usually you could fit about one eye between the eye and the bridge of the nose. But in this case, we have a very small, partially closed eye, and it's fairly deep set. So see what I'm doing? We've got close to 3 eye spaces before we get to this eye. So let's also, that's probably not the best way to think about locating this eye. Well, it will be helpful, but let's start here. Let's start with, if I create a line that's parallel from the back of the olive, that's parallel to the bridge of the nose, you see that? See what I'm doing here? This is parallel to this. That shows me where the back of the eye should be. And then the size of the eye is about 1/4 of this overall space. So it's pretty far back. So for details of the eye, because it's so small, we can't see a lot. But we can see that there's a little bit of fullness to the skin above the eye. And we can see that the iris is pretty dark in color. And we can see a little hint of the pupil towards the back of the iris, and the white of the eye is also in shadow. So it looks kind of like this, and then it's got this sort of pouch of skin under the eye, like that, and another pouch of skin above the eye like this. Don't make that eye too big, or you're not going to get a likeness. Here's the shadow of his eyebrow, and there's his eyebrow coming out towards the brow ridge. And he's got some real thick eyebrows that curve up away from the brow ridge on this side. And a deep shadow inside the eye socket right here, right in front of where the eye is. And you'll also notice that the crease at the corner of the eye continues down past the eye and then turns upward into a pretty classic kind of a crow's foot effect, like that. Okay, everyone really pay attention for a second, because this is really important advice I'm about to give you. One distance that I always like to measure when I'm doing portraits is between the bottom of the eye socket here and the top of the ala here. Most people end up with way too much room here to here. But if we turn this into intervals and we think of this as the first interval and this is the second interval, notice that this middle interval is about the same size as the other two. So we've got this interval here, and then the space in between is about the same size as these. In other words, it is much smaller than most beginners are going to draw it. So always check that distance and make sure it isn't too big. Okay. Notice that we've got the cheek is overlapping the back of the ala just a little bit. So I'm going to show that by erasing just a tiny bit of the back of the ala and then dropping this fold down at the correct angle down from the nose like that. His ala is kind of low and back, and then it swoops up, and almost the entire nostril is out in front of the philtrum. So we're going to draw that teardrop-shaped nostril out in front of the philtrum like that. And I think the tip of the nose just drops down a little further than I drew it, like that. And to give it a little bit of volume, we're going to shadow map that nose right now, just like we're shadow mapping a sphere, and do a little first shading of the shadow map, like that. And a little bit of a halftone shading up here to show where the ala ends. I'm going to just cheat in a little core shadow too along this plane break to show the way the nose turns under. It has a little bit of reflected light underneath. Okay, moving down. Very critical distance is going to be how far out the lips project. So I'm going to use another plumb line to establish that. I'm just going to pull straight up from here, and notice that I end up out in front of this indentation. So I'm ending up right about here for where the lip turns under. And then the other thing, of course, we need to check is make sure that the mouth turns under at the level that we expect it to, which is 1/3 of the way down. And I would call that a third. Do you see what I'm looking at here? This is 1 unit, 2 units, 3 units. So we're going to turn the mouth under a third of the way down towards the chin. So we got 1, 2, 3, like that. And he's smiling a little in this picture, but that does not mean that we turn immediately upward. In fact, we go down at this angle and then straight back and then down again. So, and we need to end up just in front of this fold that we created earlier. So we're going to go down a little, straight back, and then down a little again. And we need to end up right about there. Don't ask me why that still looks like a smile. But it kind of is one. Bless you. Okay, we haven't talked about the facial angle yet, but that might be a helpful thing to draw. Notice that the facial angle is way out in front of the lips, and that's because he has a fairly prominent nose and chin, but a fairly, his lips do not stick out far. So facial angle like this. And here we might ask ourselves, in terms of proportion, if this is a unit, like what's the difference in size between that curve and this curve? Yeah, this is about 1/3 or 1/4 as big as this curve. So we're going to make a curve here and make another curve here that needs to be 3 or 4 times bigger, with hardly any space between the two curves. Now, for those of you who are still in the habit of outlining lips, notice there is no line here at all. All we have is a little piece of shadow right here, so that's all we're going to draw. And for the upper lip, we're going to shade it slightly to give it a little color, and that's it. Okay, we've talked a lot about how the jawline does not follow the neck. I think that's very clear in this photograph, right? The neck is angling pretty much a straight line down towards the collar. And the jawline is really barely visible. There's a very soft plane change showing through here, which we can show with a little bit of shading. And there's a little, if we shadow map this, there's a shadow along here, along the front surface of the neck. And there's another shadow shape above it. I don't really know what to call that form, but it's sort of like that. And remember, when you're shadow mapping and throwing in shadows, you can push and pull those shadows around. You're basically using light to create an illusion of form, and when you get experienced with it, you should feel free to push those forms around until they correspond to the forms you're trying to represent. Okay, now we've got, if you want to check, if you're not confident about your ear position, you could triangulate again. It might look something like this. You go from the eye to the ear hole to the front of the mouth. And you see what kind of shaped triangle we end up with? And that can help you feel good about where you're placing something like the ear hole to make sure it's not too far back or too far forward. So mine's ending up right about here, under the tragus. And I can also run a horizontal across and see that the bottom of the earlobe comes all the way down to about where the line between the lips is. Ears, as I've mentioned, keep growing as long as you live. So your ears, when you get to be 80 years old or so, are going to be pretty large. And let's work on identifying these structures: tragus, antitragus, helix. Well, this is the part that most people have the biggest problem with. So here's the tip of the tragus. Let me clean this up. So we got the tip of the tragus here. And we've got the whole shell of the ear here. We're looking for this point right here. That's where the helix starts. So find that point. You see how close it is to the middle of the ear? It's very centrally located. And then the helix goes almost straight up. And then it makes a sharp turn this way. His ear is a very boxy shape. And then we come down towards the lobe, and we are turning into a sort of shaded fold behind the antitragus, like that. Then we go from the antitragus, and we hook forward behind the helix that we just drew, shade the overlap, shade the ear hole, and shade this little indent, which is called the triangular fossa, and that's the ear. If you're fully caught up, you can do what I'm doing and just do little random bits of shading and halftone. If you're not caught up, just try to at least draw all the outlines correctly. So we're getting to the point where we're going to draw hair. Hair confuses a lot of people. The best way to get good at drawing hair is to actually draw plaster casts, because in plaster casts the hair is sculpted and you can understand it as what it is, which is a volume. If you draw individual strands of hair, it's not going to look like it has any volume at all. It's going to look like a scraggly doll's head. So, oops. This hair is a little hard to read because of the lighting. It almost feels like a flash photograph. Like basically most of the face is in full light. But I'm going to identify, I'm trying to shadow map, I'm trying to identify some darker zones within the hair. So I'm going to shadow map it sort of like this. There's a dark zone in the front and a dark zone in the middle. And then I'm going to do a first shading of those zones. This hair comes down a little closer to the eyebrow, doesn't it? So first shading in the parts of the hair that seem darker to me, like this. And see that I'm taking this blocked in here from before and I'm turning all those straight lines into curves. You'll see what I am not doing is drawing like one hair at a time. Okay, so now we're at a stage of it's time to revise our work. And it's looking at me like my eye is a little too big and too far forward, so I'm just going to experiment, because that's what portraiture is, experimentation, with being a little smaller and further back, which I think is effective. And I also feel like the bridge of the nose is just a little further forward. So I'm going to bring that just a little further forward. And that's reading a little better to me. Brow ridge. Pretty subtle changes. As I'm going to say, every class from now on probably, it's just amazing to me that when you do a portrait, a change of a 1/16 of an inch can make or break it, and there's literally nothing else on earth that you can draw where changes of that magnitude are even going to be noticeable. And that's because our brains are so dialed in to recognize people. Because the lighting here is so frontal, we do have a lot of halftones. Halftones are areas that are fully lit, but that are just a little bit less bright than the areas around them. So the key here is to use a very light pressure when you're adding those halftones in, which we sort of have to do in order to show the highlights. Because we're working obviously on white paper today, it would be a lot easier on tone paper because we could just be throwing in those highlights and not shading all these halftones, but a thing that's fun to do if you want to practice drawing profiles is draw some of your pocket change, because quarters contain very recognizable profile images of George Washington. Pennies have very recognizable portraits of Abe Lincoln. Roosevelt dime. What else do we have? They still make Kennedy half dollars? I don't think so. Yeah. Maybe someone will see this drawing and decide to use it as the basis for a new Trump collectible coin. You have a Trump collectible coin? Did Okay, notice I'm starting to add some details in the hair that follow the way the hair is growing. The key here is don't make them all like evenly spaced, like you don't want it to look like zebra stripes. And also I'm doing something here called, I'm varying my line weight. So watch me draw this line. I'm going to start with a very light pressure, then I'm going to bear down really hard for a little while, and then I'm going to make it light again. That's something that it's going to have a lot more impact if you do that with a brush, but even with a graphite pencil, you should learn how to control your line weight. It's going to create a much more natural effect on something like hair. And where we can't see any individual striations, like up in front here, don't add them. Like that's just sort of a generalized area of dark. And up here, it's all very light. And feel free to go back to your first shading direction, like I'm doing now, whenever you want to just unify an area. Because the key here is to make the hair look like, to identify some little clumps of hair that stand out, but to still create a kind of unified overall effect of hair. And the last step in a drawing like this is to go back and identify, it helps to get your eyes a little bit out of focus and look for where the darkest darks are, and that's where you can finally just press as hard as you want. You want the darkest darks to stand out in your drawing in the same way they stand out in the reference, whether it's a real person or a photograph. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm going back and just bearing down harder wherever I see the darkest darks. And right along the collar here, you see the collar down here is sort of, the skin is sort of folding slightly over the collar. You see that? So that's, and right along here the collar is this pushing the skin in a little. So I'm going to use a little bit of contour shading to show that how that's happening. You see how my line direction changed right here? And since he always wears dark suits, it's probably a good idea to just go ahead and shade that suit. Has anyone ever seen Donald Trump in a white suit? I don't think so. Yeah? Not too much, though. That's a good point. Okay, so I'm going to give you quite a while to perfect these drawings with my assistance, and then when we're all done, I will show them at the end of this video. Okay, now a special treat for the viewers at home. We're going to see all the drawings by my intro students in my period 4 intro to drawing class. All right. And everyone in class, pay attention, because you're going to see sort of how you're rating compared to your peers here. And you're also going to learn, when you see what you did wrong, you're going to learn, you're going to do the same things wrong in every drawing you make of a person. So if you have a bad habit, you're going to repeat that habit over and over again. Okay. So what we're aiming for here is what's called a likeness. I'd say this is a really good likeness, wouldn't you? Look, you would recognize that as Trump. That's what we're aiming for. Here's another one of the best likenesses we had today. Yep. That's a good likeness. Okay. So thanks as always for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe.